All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to look at theories of everything, all-encompassing theories that can help you in your daily life by giving you a kind of an overarching paradigm where you can organize your thoughts and just be able to make better decisions and, kind of take everything that you've learned in the past and put it all together in one holistic, paradigm. And today is the 334th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Mr. Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson was an engineer who lived back in the 20th century, died back in 1990, but not after 60 years of, following up on, beyond his dreams. He was just really working on some chemistry problems, coming up with some solutions to various numerical problems having to do with chemistry. But he stumbled upon some findings that had a much wider application, and he answered the call. And in spite of never making any money and never getting any recognition, he worked on it for 60 years. After about 30 years, he finally came up with his two fundamental postulates about how the universe operates, and then took those postulates and plugged them in to come up with a theoretical universe about what the universe would look like if his postulates were correct. And then he compared his theoretical universe with the universe that the scientists had been measuring and observing over the years, and found that the comparison was quite favorable in almost all situations, except for what you would call the relativistic situations, the situations of the very fast, the very small, and the very large, and the same kind of situations that Newton's mechanics doesn't really cover, that Einstein and others had to come in and kind of put band-aids on Newton's theory. Those are the same areas that Larson's theory actually addressed. So Larson, in fact, has a book that's called Beyond Newton, meaning that he's kind of that's kind of where his starting point is, and he's making corrections to Newton's theories, not so much to Einstein's theories, because Einstein's theories were mostly wrong, sorry to say. E equals mc squared is correct. The theory of relativity, both of them aren't. So, not in Larson's book anyway. And not conceptually either. That's really one thing that Larson's theory does, is, it doesn't necessarily always correct the mathematics. A lot of the mathematics is correct. Quantum mechanics mathematics, even Einstein's mathematics, because it wasn't Einstein's. He took a lot of his mathematics from Minkowski and from Lorentz. And, but for Larson, the corrections were made in the concepts. The concepts that Einstein had are just not correct. A lot of them are kind of ad hoc kind of things, curved space and, black holes and big bangs. These are strong and weak nuclear forces. These are just made up concepts to, plug in holes. What Larson calls fudge factors and ad hoc assumptions. In Larson's system, we have a universe that is made entirely of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. That is a general reciprocal relationship between space and time Space and time are more or less the same, except that they are reciprocals of one another. They have the same qualities, and they can be seen as more or less a fraction. Motion is a fraction with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator. And it's not just any kind of motion. It's what Larson calls a scalar motion. And this scalar motion, a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction. This is a motion that's in evidence in the universe in many different applications, but the scientists have not really regarded it as being important and haven't investigated its properties too much. But you can envision a scalar motion by using a balloon with dots on it. If you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other, not in any specific direction. And the further away they are, the faster they're moving away from each other. And this relation was actually observed by the Hubble telescope. All of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. And unless we want to assume that our galaxy is at the center and is motionless, we would also have to assume that our galaxy is also participating in that motion. Gravitation also is envisioned by, instead of blowing up the balloon, you suck in the balloon. When you suck in the balloon, all of the dots are moving toward each other, but again, in no specific direction. We tend to attribute gravitation like from one body to another body, that there's some kind of force field between one body and another. But that's really because we're making one of those bodies motionless arbitrarily. But it's really that all of the bodies are moving toward all of the other bodies, not just one toward another. It looks like that when you assign a reference point. When you assign a reference point and say this one is stationary, then it looks like, you know, the other bodies are moving toward that one. And so that makes it appear as if there's some kind of force field between gravitating objects. But it's really just not so much the contraction between one and another, but the contraction of space itself. Also, space and time have 3 dimensions. They have aspects that are 3-dimensional. We understand 3-dimensional space, x, y, z coordinates, but we are unfamiliar with the concept of 3-dimensional time. But under certain circumstances, the universe manifests in 3-dimensional time. And then again, there's the clock aspect. That's the scalar aspect. Clock time is always getting later and later and later, but in no specific direction. And clock space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart, like an expanding balloon. And that is what Larson calls clock space. And space and time also only come in discrete units, meaning that there is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. And you have to have a full unit before you have anything. And if you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light, which Larson refers to as unit speed. And in the reciprocal system, unit is the center. 1 is the center. Just like a reciprocal. You have 1 in the center. On one side, you have 2. And on the other side, you have 1/2. And then on that first side, you have 3. And on the other side, to balance it out, you have 1/3. They multiply to 1, as opposed to the physicist or the legacy science theory where they multiply or they add to 0, you know, with 0 in the center and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on one side and -1, -2, -3, -4, -5 on the other. Instead, you have a reciprocal relationship with 1 at the center. And in a universe of motion, a universe made out of motion, the background or the origin, or the reference point, or the null point, is actually outward motion at the speed of light. So there is a primeval motion that precedes the rest of the universe. The state of rest of a universe of motion is to be in motion at the speed of light, outward in all directions. And any other speed is a displacement from that, not from zero, but from unit speed. And so that basically means that half of the universe is moving faster than the speed of light, and half is moving slower. He calls those the cosmic sector and the material sector, respectively. The legacy scientists know very little, if anything, about the cosmic sector. Einstein, in fact, says that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, betraying his ignorance of the cosmic sector in its entirety. Now, today we are in the third installment of reading Larson's paper called The Mechanism of the Universe. And so this is a kind of a paper on cosmology, kind of how the macro universe operates, galaxies and galaxy formation, the beginning of how the universe got started, and these very big questions that are answered a lot of times by astronomers and maybe by religious folks. And Larson, in the last installment, went over some of the major cosmological theories of the legacy scientists: the Big Bang theory, the oscillating universe theory, where the Big Bang alternates with kind of a big contraction, and then it goes bang again, and then it contracts. And then also the steady state theory, where the universe is expanding, but there's a constant flow of new matter coming in that balances it out, so to speak. In this installment, he's going to kind of examine those and propose various alternatives, I believe. So we'll get started here. And again, if you want to start this article from the beginning, you want to go back about 2 episodes and listen to those before you listen to this one. This is the cosmological situation at the moment. For an overall appraisal of just how matters now stand, I will quote 2 prominent scientists. Vannevar Bush. This job, cosmology, starts with rigorous analysis and ends in flights of imagination. And Erwin Shapiro. All chains of reasoning in cosmology are elastic. Almost every observation interpreted to support one conclusion can, in the hands of a moderately adroit theoretician, be interpreted to support the opposite. I am going to present a look at this situation from a new direction. This new view will not utilize any of the information that the astronomers have gathered from their observations. Where I refer to this information at all, it will be only for purposes of comparison with the results that have been obtained theoretically. Nor will I make any use of the information that the ecclesiastics claim to have received through revelation of one kind or another. Instead, I will present a view that is derived entirely by deduction from basic physical premises. This view is now open to us because we have at our disposal a general physical theory, the theory of the universe of motion. The most primitive condition in a universe of motion, the condition in which the universe is in existence, but nothing at all is happening, is one in which nothing exists but independent units of motion. Each such unit involves one unit of space in association with 1 unit of time. And the speed is therefore 1 over 1, or unity. This means that the physical datum, the reference level, on the natural basis, the basis to which the universe actually conforms, is not the mathematical zero, but unit speed. Let us consider an object which has no capability of independent motion and is not acted upon by any outside force. If this object occupies a spatial location, which we may call S, at some time t, then since it cannot move, it must remain at the same location indefinitely. But in a universe of motion, this object is not motionless in respect to the arbitrary stationary system of reference that we customarily utilize. It is motionless with respect to the natural system of reference. That natural system is moving outward at unit speed with respect to the stationary system, carrying all physical objects with it. Thus, the object in question does not remain at the point in a stationary reference system which we have called S. It moves outward from that location at unit speed, so that at time t plus 1, it occupies spatial location S plus 1. Some may find this difficult to reconcile with their present beliefs. We are accustomed to viewing motion in the context of its relation to a stationary frame of reference. If an object has no capability of independent motion, then it seems almost axiomatic to most that its speed is 0 with respect to that stationary reference frame. But there is no good reason why the universe must necessarily conform to human ideas as to what is right and proper. The general physical theory that we have developed, a theory that describes how the universe actually behaves, not what any of us thinks the way it ought to behave, tells us that in addition to whatever motions it may possess, every object in the universe is moving outward at unit speed away from all other objects, simply by reason of the motion of the natural reference system relative to the stationary system that we have arbitrarily selected as a frame of reference. Here we have a very important conclusion that, as I have shown, is derived purely by deduction from the general properties of a universe of motion. It will not be possible to follow the lines or chains of deduction leading to other conclusions in this same detailed manner on this occasion. For present purposes, I will merely indicate the points at which we will have to go back to the basic premises and follow a new chain of deductions. And I will specify the conclusions that are thus reached, to the extent that they are relevant to the subjects under discussion. The full details of the theoretical development are available in my publications and those of my associates. One of these additional lines of deductions from the basic premises arrives at the conclusion that atoms of matter are combinations of rotational motions, and that the nature of these atomic rotations is such that they may have a translational aspect. As an analogy, we may consider a ball rolling along the floor. This ball does not have an independent translational motion, as it would if it were flying through the air while rotating. It has no motion other than the rotation, but the effect of this rotation under the particular circumstances is to move the ball forward translationally. A further finding from the same chain of deductions is that the translational motion due to the atomic rotation necessarily opposes the outward progression of the natural reference system. Thus, in addition to the outward motion due to this progression, every atom or aggregate of matter is subject to an opposing inward motion. This inward motion is what we know as gravitation. It has long been recognized that there are many physical phenomena that are not capable of satisfactory explanation on the basis of only one universal force or motion, which is another way of looking at the same thing. That has heretofore been recognized. That is gravitation. For example, Gold and Hoyle make this comment, quote, attempts to explain both the expansion of the universe and the condensation of galaxies must be very largely contradictory, so long as gravitation is the only force field under consideration. For if the expansive kinetic energy of matter is adequate to give universal expansion against the gravitational field, it is adequate to prevent local condensation under gravity and vice versa. That is why, essentially, the formation of galaxies is passed over with little comment in most systems of cosmology. Carl K. Darrow made the same point in connection with the question of interatomic equilibrium in the solid state, emphasizing that one force alone, whatever it may be, is not sufficient. There must also be what he called an antagonist. Darrow went on to say, quote, this essential and powerful force has no name of its own. This is because it is usually described in words not conveying directly the notion of force, end quote. The globular star clusters provide still another example of the same kind. Like the formation of galaxies, this situation is passed over with little comment by the astronomers, but E. Freundlich discussed at length in a publication of the Royal Astronomical Society some years ago. He noted that gravitation is the only force available to the theorists. And on this basis, he says, the main problem presented by the globular clusters is their very existence as finite systems. Identification of the antagonist to gravitation, the outward progression of the natural reference system, not only resolves these specific problems, but also throws new light on many other physical situations. An important point in this connection is that the net resultant of the two opposing motions varies with the distance. The inward motion due to the atomic rotation originates at the specific locations occupied by material aggregates, and it therefore decreases with distance in accordance with the inverse square law. The outward progression of the reference system is effective everywhere. It follows that at the shorter distances, the gravitational motion is the greater, and all objects continually move toward each other, unless they are subjected to external forces. As the distance increases, the gravitational motion decreases, and at some point reaches equality with the outward motion of the reference system. Beyond this point, the net motion is outward, increasing toward the speed of light as the gravitational effect is continually attenuated. Okay, so that is what Larson calls the gravitational limit, or the first gravitational limit. Inside the gravitational limit, the net force is inward, and so bodies tend to fall inward. But beyond that point, gravitation is attenuated to the point where the net motion is outward, and so bodies tend to go outward from outside the gravitational limit. Now, at a very great distance, much further away, the gravitation is attenuated to the point where it becomes negligible, and then all of the bodies are receding at the speed of light. Beyond that point, that's what Larson calls the second gravitational limit. Now, gravitation is, I guess, it's somewhat of a misnomer. Gravitation is basically the anti-progression. The progression of the natural reference system is outward at the speed of light. We might call that anti-gravity, although he has a different kind of terminology for anti-gravity here later on. But that is basically what that force is. It's of anti-gravity. It's the opposite of gravity. It moves everything apart. But he calls it the progression of the natural reference system, and gravitation is the opposite, but he uses the same terminology, gravitation, but he doesn't use the terminology anti-gravitation, because it would make it seem like gravitation is the primary force, and this anti-gravitation is like secondary. But it's really that the progression, or the so-called, what I would say that is de facto anti-gravity force, is primary, and then gravitation is. So you could think about calling gravitation like anti-progression, or possibly regression or something. Okay, we're going to leave it right there, and we will start up with the rest of this paper tomorrow. It looks like I got at least 2 more days to go on this paper, possibly 3, and then we'll be at the end. So he's going to get further into the cosmological nuts and bolts of the reciprocal system. What does his theoretical universe look like as compared to the legacy scientists who are in the debate, whether it's the Big Bang, the oscillation theory, or the steady state theory? Where does Larson weigh in? And those questions will be answered starting in the next video tomorrow. So please tune in, and thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.